Welcome, everyone, to the Paperboy Ventures podcast. We have a timely and intriguing episode today as we walk through the state of the hemp-derived THC beverage industry here in the U.S. From a sales and revenue standpoint, the category has been on fire, growing to the hundreds of millions of dollars in the past few years. And it's one that is projected to grow well into the billions. But the biggest question here is how regulators at both the federal and state levels will treat the category moving forward. So we're sitting here today, it's May 27th, and the scene is super active across our biggest markets in the country. And what I mean by that, just last week, the Texas House passed SB 3, which is a bill that's headed to the governor's desk for signature shortly, and that all but bans hemp-derived THC products. So we'll get to that shortly, but first, I'm joined by two guests today that are incredibly well-informed on this topic and are here today to share their thoughts, their opinions, their hot takes, their cold takes, their recos. So let's just get to the intros. So Jake, we'll start with you, introducing Jake Bullock, the co-founder and CEO of Cann Beverages. Jake, welcome.
Thanks, Kyle. Great to be here.
Thrilled to have you, and looking forward to hearing your perspective as a leader of a brand in the space. So thank you for joining, and introducing Diana Eberlein, the Chief External Affairs Officer at Vertosa, and also the chair of CABA, which is the Coalition for Adult Beverage Alternatives. Diana, welcome.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for having me.
Perfect. So let's start with a little bit more on each of you, so our listeners have context as to where your perspective is coming from. Jake, can you just give us the high-level overview of what you are doing leading Cann in the market?
Yeah, so maybe starting with what is Cann. We make a range of microdose infused THC and CBD beverages. They are really meant to be alcohol alternatives. That was the real big idea behind this, was could you take THC and CBD, these sort of emerging active ingredients, this emerging category, and put them into a social beverage that more or less approximates sort of the potency, the strength of an alcoholic drink, and also make them taste great and really sort of fit into folks' lives who might have otherwise been grabbing a bottle of wine, a few beers at the end of a long day, instead are drinking Cann.
Great. And when you say microdose, what do you mean by that?
So if you think about other mild intoxicants that we consume, caffeine, alcohol, we interestingly drink them. That seems to be the form factor that consumers want to consume mild intoxicants, and really unlocks that social potential, right, of how we come together and socialize. But if you also think about it, we actually consume caffeine and alcohol in microdoses. We don't really think about it in that context because they've been around for so long, but there's a reason you can have a few cups of coffee in a day or a few glasses of wine. It's about the time that the body can metabolize that intoxicant. And it can, when we started this business and really created the microdose category, at the time there were cannabis beverages when we launched 6 years ago. They had 100 milligrams of THC. And actually, if you go into a dispensary today in California, that's still the most popular beverage, which is pretty wild. We came in with something much more subversive. We said, well, what if we divided that by 50? What if we did 2 milligrams? And the reason was because of alcohol and caffeine. It's about the time that it takes the body to metabolize that intoxicant is roughly the same. It's about an hour. And we thought that was important because if you're making an alcohol alternative, it should fit in and integrate with alcohol in that same way. We want people to be able to drink a few of these, right? There's a concept that beer has of sessionability, right? If you think about IPAs being really, really hot and you couldn't really drink like 3 or 4 of them. It was too much ABV. And so you think about, okay, well, what happened? How do you bring that down into a more sessionable range? That's really where we think the magic is in THC drinks. And it's why, Cann's products, we launched with 2 milligrams of THC. It's still one of our most popular products.
Yeah. Okay, great. So the 2 milligram is really the start of the microdose in your opinion. And do you go up to a certain amount, or what's the high end of the microdose?
This is shifting a little bit, right? It shifted over the last, 6 years we've been on the market, but like I said, at the time when we launched, 100 was the highest, and actually the lowest was 10. So when we were coming in with the 2 milligram, that really felt like microdose. But even 5 feels like a microdose relative. 5 milligrams of THC feels like a microdose relative to 10, right? It's half the amount. So I really think about the 5s and below as being in the microdose. Some people are trying to talk about a low dose, which may be kind of 5 and 10 range. But we're all talking about stuff that's on the really low end of the potency spectrum.
Makes sense. Yeah. And 100 is a lot of THC content. So, I think a vast majority of people that are consuming cannabis would probably appreciate the type of products that you're putting out. So nicely done. And Diana, let's go to you. Can you fill us in about, I guess, your two roles? You've got Vertosa and CABA. So whichever one you'd like to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, I'll start off by saying I am Jake's target demo. I entered this space 8 years ago after discovering low dose beverage, which barely existed within the dispensary channel. And beverage is the only way I consume cannabis. It was the only way I could control my experience. And so when Cann launched and won the BevNet's Best New Beverage Showdown, I remember that being like such a huge turning point for this category because you only saw 100 milligram beverages at dispensaries. And to this day, you really only see those because that speaks to a very different demographic. So thank you to Jake and Cann for putting out a product that finally addressed my needs. And, hemp really allowed this opportunity for this category to really grow. So my role, I'm Chief External Affairs Officer at Vertosa, which is one of the leading emulsion providers in the space, which is the active ingredient that allows for this consistent sessionable experience that Jake referenced. And then my other role is chair of the Coalition for Adult Beverage Alternatives, which was a coalition that was created to focus on some of the existential threats to the current marketplace, which involves, the Farm Bill being up for renewal, as well as the Appropriations Bill currently having ban language that would eliminate intoxicating cannabinoids from hemp at the federal level. We also offer educational services at the state level, as well as just for general CPG and industry folks who are entering this space, because we realize this is a new emerging category that for a lot of people popped up overnight, even though I think Jake and I both know that this was not an overnight thing. If anything, it's something that's been nearly a decade in the making. And this is an exciting turning point for our category. So a lot of what I do is trying to pave the way forward, working with strategic partners on the alcohol and traditional CPG side.
Right. And if I have it correctly, you do spend a good amount of time with lawmakers in DC, getting a sense of what they need, what they want, what they're hearing from their constituents, and then you're helping them to form what
Yep.
might turn into okay.
Yeah, we have template regulations. We have a code of conduct that is the foundation of our coalition, which really outlines how we would like to see low dose beverage regulated in the future. And I will say we've defined low dose as up to 10 milligrams per serving, 100 milligrams per package, which allows for those spirits-like solutions out there that have multi-serving products, as well as 6-packs, 12-packs, things like that we want to see in the future as well. A lot of the education that we're providing is because, again, while this category might be a decade in the making for someone like Jake and I, beverage was not the first category that comes to mind when you think of hemp or cannabis. So there's a lot of education going into what is this? What is the experience being delivered? Who is our target demo? As well as how are these being manufactured and distributed? And how do we keep them out of kids' hands? Which tends to be one of the number one concerns that we hear about hemp and cannabis in general.
Yeah, and let's get to Texas, and I'd love to hear about what's going on there and doing some reading. It sounds like that is the number one objection, and love to hear you answer that in some more detail. But what year was that BevNet pitch? I'm curious. Where are we?
It was in the summer of 2019.
2019. Okay. So, and when did Cann get started? Was it 2018?
It was fun. So we actually won BevNet New Beverage Showdown, and we're launching the next day, that weekend. So it was a good thing we won, because otherwise we might have been in some trouble.
That's great. And I know BevNet's coming up here in a couple of weeks. So curious to see who wins it this year. But thanks, Diana. I think you gave us the perfect setting of the stage, because I think Maybe the most confusing part of this industry to outsiders is how the federal and state laws are really contradicting each other. So before we get to what's happening in Texas right now, I think it makes sense to start with the 2018 Farm Bill, because that is really where the I guess the floodgates open for low dose beverage, hemp-derived THC beverage to get to the market. So I guess this question could be for either of you, but can you define the 2018 Farm Bill and what that definition came to be?
Sure. Yeah, the Farm Bill is a bill that's renewed every 4 or 5 years, focusing on issues that impact farmers directly. So typically, you're hearing about industrial ingredients, some for CPG as well. But everything from food stamps, the SNAP program. There's a lot baked into that bill. That is a multi-billion-dollar bill. What they did was they defined in the 2018 Farm Bill, they defined and legalized any derivatives of hemp were essentially legalized. So let me take a step back. Hemp was defined as anything up to 0.3% THC. Anything over that 0.3% was defined as marijuana. So when the definitions legalized any derivatives from hemp, it included that up to 0.3% of D9 THC, which was in the plant. And a lot of people heard during this time of the 2018 Farm Bill being created, it's rope, not dope. Turns out there's a little bit of dope in that hemp. And when you isolate it, and based on the way it was written within the law, it was legalized, people realized that they could actually create an intoxicating product that could make a consumer feel a psychoactive effect using the THC derived from hemp. But it did open the floodgates, if you will, for these products to be sold across the US, shipped across state lines, integrated into all sorts of products, beverage being one of them.
Right. And so when this was passed in 2018, the intent from Congress was not to open those floodgates, right? It was more so to allow farmers to sell hemp products that, for textiles or for oil or for anything else. Is that right?
Correct. And I think there's been some debate on what the intent was, but ultimately the feedback that we have gotten is that a lot of legislators as well as regulators feel that they were kind of duped into believing that they were legalizing industrial hemp and making this an opportunity for farmers to create textiles, fibers, things like that. And then intoxicating cannabinoids ended up being a large portion of the, I guess, the consequences, if you will, of how that language was written.
And prior to the 2018 Farm Bill, hemp in that way was completely illegal. It was a Schedule 1 drug, I believe, or are you familiar? Do you know what it used to be before that?
I think it was just that there was a lack of definition in terms of what they could be growing on their farms and what licenses you needed, because hemp textiles and hemp materials, hempcrete, things like that had existed prior to the Farm Bill. So I think it was just about usages and, again, what farmers had the ability to grow.
Okay. And when the division between hemp and marijuana, I think, is important to just get clear on. And it's 0.3% THC by dry weight. So when you're selling a beverage, Jake, that's mostly water, right? So how does that work for a company like Cann? How are you able to stay within that?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. It's an interesting one because we didn't start in hemp. We actually started in marijuana. 6 years ago, that was in the California dispensary market, and all of our products were derived, the THC and the CBD, from marijuana. And so it wasn't really until 2.5 years ago when Minnesota passed a law that said if you can extract THC and CBD from hemp, you can sell it. You can sell those beverages in Minnesota liquor stores. And so we were like, well, wait, can we extract THC and CBD from hemp? I think a lot of what Diana is describing in Congress is it wasn't so much that that folks were duping Congress. We just didn't know. Like, at least from our perspective, we didn't even know it was possible from a technology standpoint to extract these cannabinoids. And whether they sort of intended it to go this way or not, it's pretty interesting that they've arrived at something that might actually be really good policy, federally and at the state level, for how to monitor these and regulate these cannabinoids, in large part because what happens is when you put a 0.3% by dry weight standard, that makes a lot of sense in an agricultural context, right? You take the crop, you dehydrate it. That's a normal step in the process. And then you weigh it. You can do all the math on the sort of dehydrated weight. And as a result of that, there's consistency. It doesn't apply to, it's not meant to be applied to consumer food and beverage products, right? Now, it's the only law on the books. And so because of that, courts and states and government have applied this standard. And it is what we have to use in large part because there's no other way. Now, you could imagine a scenario where following the passing of the Farm Bill that defined this new agricultural product, hemp, you could have seen the FDA come in and say, well, wait, this could also be a food additive. What do we know about this as a food additive? And if they were being honest with themselves, they would know that it's been consumed in food and beverages for hundreds of years in this country and thousands of years in other countries, and is really safe. And there's a lot of data around it, particularly naturally derived hemp extracts. And they could have set some standards, some federal standards for how this food additive could be added to food, right? Or drinks, like they do with caffeine and other things. Right? That did not happen. And we can talk about why that didn't happen, but it was sort of like a standoff between Congress and the FDA. So we're kind of taking a look at this as a brand, trying to make a beverage and saying, okay, well, we can apply the 0.3% by dry weight standard to our product. You remove the water. Okay, what's left? Mostly sugar now, and quite a lot of it relative to anything else, flavor or juice or dehydrated juice, right? In the THC or CBD. So part of the challenge that we're facing and what Diana and I are fighting every day is because the 0.3% by dry weight standard actually allows quite a lot of THC in products. If you think about, a very sugary beverage or a gummy, right, which is almost all sugar, you could have a pretty high legal threshold there. Not a legal threshold that we wouldn't think would be responsible in a beverage or a food product. And so that's kind of the world that we find ourselves in. It's actually fairly straightforward to comply with the hemp laws around our drinks. What's much harder is to deal with the bad actors that are putting hundreds, in some cases thousands of milligrams of THC and other intoxicating cannabinoids into gummy products, into beverage products. No one believes those products should be allowed except for those bad actors. That is actually the fight that we're fighting. And it is the area where we agree with elected officials, including the lieutenant governor in Texas, we got to get those products out of the market. Now, where we disagree is how to do that. And we think that you should allow low potency hemp drinks. You should tax them. You should use that money for enforcement. And we've seen good examples of that, right, in states like Minnesota, which kicked this whole thing off.
A great segue into the Texas situation. So, Diana, I know you've been on the ground. You've been talking to a lot of people there, and this is a very active situation. Can you just tell us what's been going on in the past week or two there and where we're at?
So last week is when SB3 was heard, by the House and was gone over its last review. And basically what happened was politics is politics, and a very seasoned politician basically was bartering and to get a public education bill across and fully funded with the House. They made some concessions, and one of those was that he wanted his initial ban for THC, or I should say for intoxicating cannabinoids from hemp, to be upheld. So essentially an entire a ban of all intoxicating cannabinoids. It was just CBD and CBG that prevail at the end of the day. So it's essentially another ban. And we've already seen how this plays out in states like California, which is why there's been a lot of pushback on the ground, not only from groups like us that operate on the hemp side, but also veterans groups. A lot of the hemp groups that are employed there's 50,000 jobs that are on the line here with a ban. This is a $6 billion industry, not just beverage. All of hemp is a $6 billion industry in Texas, according to the lieutenant governor himself. So what we see when we have bans is increase in the illicit market, which are products that are untested, they're generally high potency. They're usually using synthetic or entirely manufactured cannabinoids that are made outside of the plant that are incredibly high potency. These are the products that they don't care if there's a ban or if there's regulation. They're going to try to operate regardless. When you put a ban in place, the good actors go away. So unfortunately, the illicit market and the cartel, which is a real concern in Texas, those are the groups that thrive in this market. But we also have a situation where veterans now don't have access to the products that they need. And currently there is the Texas Compassionate Use Program, which is essentially their medical program that a lot of veterans rely on. Those products, according to the veteran groups, do not meet the needs that they need to handle some of the issues that they are tackling and using THC products for. And as a result, they are pushing back as well, because the Teacup program, with the most recent revision of their bill, will not increase the accessibility to the products that they need. So we have not only a job market that will suffer as a result of this, you will not have the revenue that you could tax and enforce, regulation in place. And then you have an illicit market that will continue to thrive as a result. And we've seen this in states like California. In California, when Gavin Newsom implemented his ban, the 3-tier system worked. The beverages got pulled from the shelves of basically every ABC store, every licensed store that has a state or federal license operating within the alcohol space. The ABC regulatory system knows how to handle situations like this. Those products were pulled immediately. What wasn't pulled were the products that are in those individual, head shops, smoke shops, the illicit market. And now there's nothing to tax and collect tax revenue to enforce safety protocols and regulation. And there's ways that this can be done, which actually the initial bill, HB 28, while yes, was exclusively a beverage bill, essentially, those regulations would have allowed for the opportunity for these state regulators to enforce and make sure that safe product that was naturally derived, free of synthetics, and a proper potency was accessible to only adults.
Right. And to simplify, I guess this whole situation, both of you would like to see standards, clear standards versus a ban, which the bans have taken place in a number of these states. And if you could, I think it's important if we sort of steelman the case for what's going on. And let's just use Texas as an example, and then we can get to California. So what's the argument from the lieutenant governor on why a ban needs to be in place rather than setting standards like Minnesota has done?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? I think if I try to really be generous here in what we're hearing, it's first that there are bad actors. We agree. There are products out there that are highly potent. Many of them are marketing intentionally to kids, or they're infringing on existing brands' IP, like Skittles spelled with a Z, kind of a product with 100 milligrams of synthetic cannabinoid in it. And those products are being sold in a pretty unrestricted environment. Like Diana said, maybe it's a smoke shop, maybe it's a convenience store, sort of like a corner store. And that is happening, and that is real, and that problem needs to be solved. Texas, the laws on the books in Texas prior to this ban were really about CBD. And so you don't have the types of regulations that most other states have. 21 plus. Clear product testing, packaging and labeling guidelines, the 3-tier system, which, as Diana points out, is very, very effective at doing compliance and keeping bad actors off the shelves. These products are sold wherever alcohol is sold and nowhere else. They've got to come on trucks that are bringing alcohol. Getting on those alcohol trucks is not an easy feat. I spend most of my time every day figuring out how to do that. And there are layers and layers of compliance. So the second point that the lieutenant governor makes is it's too difficult for us to regulate this. We have to ban it because we can't regulate it. Diana did a good job explaining why that doesn't make a ton of sense. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding here. Someone is advising lieutenant governor and doing a really bad job of it, right? It is not the case that you pass a ban like this and these products go away. That is not going to happen.
Right. They go to the illegal areas in the market.
It goes illegal.
And then it becomes easier for people to, or for the wrong hands to get.
It goes underground. And the important point here is it would be a mistake to assume that happens in a world where all of Texas's neighboring states were banning it as well. They are not. Texas will be the only state in the South that is not allowing hemp drinks. It is going the way of California. It does not make any sense. I think it is going to go up as a historic mistake for the state, and really unfortunate to have a $6 billion industry, all of the jobs that have been created. I mean, craft beer was dead in Texas. It's coming back to life. They're going to kill it again here. So, and Texas is a state which has hemp farmers, and those farmers are part of the coalition advocating here. 90-something% of their crop the dollar value of their crop goes to extracts. It's not all to intoxicating cannabinoids, but a lot of it is. And so it's going to be really hard to support hemp farming in the state as well. And guess what? That's great news for North Carolina. They'll take the business.
Anything to add on that, Diana, or did he get it all?
I think one thing that I urge all politicians and regulators to understand is if we don't catch up with regulation of all of hemp and cannabis as a whole, the consumer has told us that they will go to the illicit market to get what they need. Currently in California, the illicit market is over 70% of the cannabis market in California. While you will not see low dose beverages in, liquor shops and things like that there, you will find those high dose gummies. You will find the, high dose vapes and things like that they were initially concerned about. Those are usually the categories that they mention when they're concerned about consumer safety, these products getting in the hands of children. We have a real life case study of a ban failing in California. So I urge regulators and legislators to really pay attention to that, because we've already seen it happen. And there are regulations we can put in place. We are looking to build a foundation to grow off of. We are willing to compromise. We're not going to get everything that we would like from a regulatory standpoint, but at least representing the adult beverage category in terms of THC beverage here, we're trying to be treated like other adult beverages. We want to be taxed. We want to be regulated. We want the same penalties. If someone breaks, a rule or regulation, treat us like other adult beverages, because ultimately that is how we should be treated, I think, as a category. Other categories, we realize our regulations that we recommend are not necessarily a one size fits all for every other THC infused product on the market. But if you take a look at historically what's happened when you ban accessibility of these products, the consumers told us they will go and find what they need, and that puts the consumer at risk. And at the end of the day, that is not only the brand's number one priority is to keep the consumer safe, or it should be their number one priority, and it certainly is at our coalition, but that should be the regulators and the legislators' focus as well, is keeping the consumer safe.
Right. And it's interesting that we do have these case studies all across the country, because we have so many different positions by these states. And it looks like California, so it was Newsom who put that into play like in the fall of last year. And it looks like that's up or they're debating it right now on if that will stay in place or if they're going to change it. Do you have any insight on that, or what the current status is in California? Because I heard you say it's not working, and you mentioned the 70% illicit market, which, yeah, if it's 70%, like that is definitely not how they drew it up. But yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on California.
And I will address the fact that, there was a recent PR statement that came from Gavin Newsom's team about how successful the ban was. And what that covered was the ABC stores, the beverage control group that basically went and looked at all the licensed liquor stores and things like that and looked and said, okay, all these products are gone. Of course they are. The 3-tier system works. This is how it operates. There are checks and balances that make those operators stay in line. What that didn't include were the smoke shops, the head shops, the convenience stores, and a lot of those are independent retailers. So it was spun as if it was a win. But if you go in that market and you walk the streets of California and you're going into the head shops, smoke shops, and these independent stores, you are going to find those high dose products. You are going to find the synthetic products that they talk about having concerns with. So we know it didn't work. And you also have a struggling marijuana industry in California. It's been overly taxed and overly regulated. So you have both sides that are contributing to a very strong illicit market. So there's adjustments on both sides. And for us, our initiative has not always been just to support the hemp industry. We have been agnostic to where the source, where the THC comes from. And part of that is because we believe the regulatory pathway forward is going to be based on dosage, and where these products belong is based on, like you have an over-the-counter version. You've got a lower dose version that's available in liquor stores, convenience stores, anywhere that's age-gated and where alcohol and other adult beverages are made available. You have the high dose stuff that continues to do very well in the dispensary channel, and maybe that channel changes over time. I think we absolutely all agree that obviously descheduling would be ideal, but rescheduling would be certainly helpful in terms of alleviating some of the tax burdens that the marijuana side has. That industry is struggling in California. So I think there's a lot that we could do to continue proving, or I should say improving upon the overall cannabinoid marketplace for the consumer.
Well said. And when you're looking at the success story in the United States, is it Minnesota? Is that the regulatory framework that you think would work the best? Or
I don't think there's a perfect market yet. I do think that Minnesota has proven to not only provide access to products that consumers want, but it is the case study that shows that on premise, in terms of these products being available at bars and restaurants alongside alcohol options, Minnesota didn't burn to the ground. In fact, the reports were positive. They saw less violent crime, less theft. Restaurants reported higher orders of desserts, which I think just goes to prove that the munchies do exist. So there's a lot of good things that came from Minnesota, and they're the longest standing market. So right now, that is definitely a case study that we can highlight. But I would say, looking at Tennessee's regulations, they could be the next, case study that we highlight as well. Illinois has a bill that's up right now that if that moves forward, that Illinois could be a case study that we're featuring moving forward. And I do think that ultimately when it comes to what the future regulation of this category looks like, we're probably cherry picking things that have worked in different markets. We're going to have Alabama that we can take a look at, Georgia, and a handful of others where we will see probably certain things perform better than others. And I think we're going to learn from all of those markets. But Minnesota is obviously, it's not where anyone saw this being born, but certainly an opportunity that we continue to highlight, and I think is doing the best job of representing how THC beverages can be completely normalized. I would say cannabis as a whole has been normalized a lot in Minnesota because of the current regulations there. And Jake, you guys were one of the first beverages, to come in, I think, from the marijuana market and jump into the Minnesota space. So you can probably speak to what that evolution has looked like over time too.
Yeah, Minnesota is a great market. I would say, similar to alcohol, right? Every state has their own sort of parochial rules. I think we should expect that. We're already starting to see it to some degree, right? Some states allow all alcohol, in one facility, separate sort of entrance like Minnesota does. Others have liquor in their own state-run stores, or, maybe beer can be in the grocery in some cases. So we'll see those variations, I think, market by market. What Minnesota did and other states are following suit that matters is 21 plus age verification, dosage caps, restricting the amount of THC and the potency there, clear packaging and labeling guidelines. So you know what's in the product, and then testing to back that up. So you say you put in 2 milligrams, you actually show that you put in 2 milligrams. That is those steps we're doing in every single market, regardless of whether they're required. It's part of what the coalition of adult beverage alternatives that Diana runs. What makes that organization so different is all of its members are abiding by the regulations that we are pushing. And we're doing that across markets. And so, states that check those boxes are going to be good markets, are going to be safe markets, markets where these products are out of the hands of kids, where adults can choose low potency versions that they like. And where the compliance and the enforcement is really being done by the existing alcohol supply chain, which is an important feature as well of how this whole thing works.
And the other thing I'll throw in there, and Jake can speak to this more than I can, but I know it because I hear about it all the time. Brands who are looking to work with alcohol partners and are exploring and expanding this market in spaces where this is still new and there is some gray area still, they're having to provide 2 to 3 times as much paperwork and documentation to prove the quality of their product, to prove that they are abiding by the regulations, because this is a new space. We have a PR issue. We're coming out of prohibition, right? So we've got to earn that trust. And I think brands, like Cann and those that are members of the coalition, walking in saying these are the standards that we abide by, and here's the documentation behind it. Here's the chain of custody. Everything that would be expected if you were another adult beverage in this space is expected, but we're providing 2 to 3 times as much documentation to build that trust.
Coming out of prohibition, it sounds funny to talk about that because you think prohibition like 1920s, but no, it's true. And I think it's what I'm thinking about is, what does the current breakdown of the U.S. look like when you have the bans on one end, and then you have the standardized regulated markets like Minnesota on the other. It seems like, based on the news, that more and more states are heading in this direction of going like outright ban, and Connecticut has something that's in place like that, and that's my home state. You've got Texas, you've got California. So I'm curious if you could help me understand, like, where is the total market sit right now, if you look across the U.S.
Yeah, I would push back on that. I think that is not the case. Actually, more and more states are rejecting bans. I think there was something like 16 bans that were proposed in the legislative sessions over the last few months this spring. It looks like Texas will be the only one that went through. So it's actually the opposite. States are looking at this and they're saying, no, we will allow hemp THC drinks, in some cases, other form factors. Connecticut is a good example. That was last year, but they allow the products. It's actually our best market. But now they capped the THC at 3 milligrams. So not everyone is in that market because they basically made it a very, very microdose market. There's other states that have done that too. So the question is more about, where do you draw the line and what state's getting comfortable there? It's only a few that have said the line should be 0, and they're going to find. I mean, California's seeing it already. Texas, barring a veto from the governor, we'll see it very soon. That if you draw the line at 0, your life is much, much harder than if you draw the line somewhere above 0. And so I think that, I can't remember the exact number, but since Minnesota passed its law 2 years ago, 20 states have followed suit with similar laws. Many other states have updated their existing hemp CBD laws to reflect these products as well, using regulatory process. So the pendulum is actually swinging the other way. You just have these sort of isolated examples, and they are, not only are they isolated, but they will be sort of aberrations. Whether California continues this ban or through the emergency rulemaking process, or legislation gets passed, or they try something else. It will only be for a short period of time. If you're looking at a 5-year sort of horizon, these drinks will be available in probably every state.
Interesting. I think it's the gravitation towards negative headlines that was putting that narrative in my mind.
Yes.
But appreciate the correction.
You can imagine what it was like running this business over the last couple of months, when every other day there was like, the Alabama, House bans this and the Georgia Senate bans that. It's part of what makes our process, our democratic process, I think, a good one. But when that all gets reported in the media, like all these states are banning hemp THC. I just saw a headline today that said Texas and Tennessee ban hemp drinks. And it's like, no, they didn't read the law. Tennessee's not banning them at all. Actually, they're creating a set of permissive rules that make a lot of sense. So, there's that press layer as well. But the net effect here is really positive. And I think the reason why these consumers love these products, I cannot stress this enough, the impact. This is not like a new sort of fun intoxicant that everyone's running around, getting high on. That's like not the experience of our customers. They're drinking these products. These are young parents. They have like a 2-year-old that wakes them up at 6 a.m. every morning, and their routine of having a couple glasses of wine the night before is not working for them anymore. It is changing those parents' lives. We have an older demographic that battles inflammation. Alcohol is killer for inflammation. They're waking up after having a few cans, feeling no pain. And for the first time, since maybe they were 45. And these folks are 60, 65, 70 years old. It's pretty amazing, the stuff we hear. So I think that people forget that what these products are doing to consumers is so transformative. That's why we're seeing this push. It's why hemp in some ways is succeeding, where the broader marijuana industry has struggled, because you're just seeing this rabid support from just sort of mainstream average people that would otherwise be drinking a glass of wine, finding these products really improving the quality of their lives.
You're speaking to me directly there. I've got 3 kids under 5 years old, and the wine and the beer just kills me now. Alcohol. So yeah, I appreciate what you do. It's much easier to wake up at 4 a.m. after a couple of cans versus a couple of cans of beer. The Farm Bill, when is that up for renewal? Is it later this year, or what's the word on that?
It should be later this year. Mixed feedback as to whether it gets completed this year or gets pushed out another year, which would probably not make the farmers very happy, since it dictates a lot of things that they need outside of us. I think we have this idea as hemp, and this being the focus of our echo chamber on LinkedIn, thinking that we are the biggest issue the Farm Bill has to tackle. We are far from it. I always say we're not Marsha, like Marsha. That's not us. We're actually Jan. We're like smack dab in the middle. We are not the only thing they have to worry about. The SNAP program is a much bigger focus for farmers, and food stamps, things like that. So there's a huge focus on getting those budgets on both sides kind of more aligned. If that gets pushed out another year, that buys us more time on the Farm Bill side, but there is still currently ban language in the Department of Agricultural Committee's appropriations bill. Now, to give everyone a little bit of background on when that happened, after the Mary Miller Amendment, which put ban language back into the Farm Bill, hit last May. That was right before Memorial Day, so literally about a year ago, that language was put into the bill. Shortly thereafter, the same language was put into the appropriations bill, which is a budget bill associated with the Department of Agriculture. Oftentimes, the reason that language might be put into a budget bill versus something like the Farm Bill is because that is a bill that is renewed on an annual basis. So if there's urgency, that bill is something that has to get pushed through eventually. So the likelihood of, when you have a Farm Bill, something that's being renewed after 4 or 5 years, there's a lot more that's going into that. And if it's going to get kicked out a year, there's a lot of other things to focus on. So this is a common strategy, but a lot of groups felt like, hey, this language doesn't really belong in a budget bill. Now, when you have at the federal level, we've been pushing and educating, saying, hey, there's no reason to change the Farm Bill. You have a lot of farmers that adjusted how they were growing this crop to abide by the 2018 Farm Bill, and they're reaping the benefits because we're buying a lot of this product to infuse our products as well as other hemp products on the market. The states push for states' rights. The states are figuring out how to regulate this. What becomes very difficult is when the federal government gives states rights, and then the states are having difficulty regulating it and putting in how they can protect the consumer and also avoid things like lawsuits. We've seen that happen in a number of states where they end up tied up in litigation, and the states go, we're trying to regulate it, but we're tied up in litigation, so we need federal support. So you have a little bit of push-pull that's happening right now, and it's a little bit of chicken or the egg, because we can focus a lot of energy on the state level, but if at the federal level it gets banned, that state stuff doesn't matter. At the federal level, if it's kept open, but all the states ban everything, it doesn't matter, right? So we have to work on both. And that's why we focus a lot on the federal, because I'm based in DC and can be present and on site to kind of walk them through our code of conduct, but also so that we can help the education at the state level and provide the guardrails that we've seen work in states like Minnesota. So we're tag teaming both, but the Farm Bill language needs to be cleaned up eventually when that gets pushed through. Our goal would be to have that language that's currently bans intoxicating cannabinoids from hemp. Our goal would be to remove that language. However, if there is urgency for them to implement regulation at that level, we've drafted permissive language that cleans up the synthetic concerns that they have. Essentially, the new and novel cannabinoids, the THCPs of the world that are 25 times as strong as D9, do not naturally occur within the plant. And, frankly, I don't think the consumer ever asked for that. So those are the things that we're trying to clean up. And that will also support the farmers that are currently active in this space as well.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, I had never heard of what you just mentioned, the 25 times molecule. That sounds terrifying.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's more prevalent than I think a lot of us in beverage would have assumed. And I think a lot of reasons why you don't see as many bad actors in the beverage space specifically is because of who we need to work with to get our product more accessible to our target consumer, which is the adult beverage consumer. When you're working with a brewer, they already have licensing and work within a regulated space. They're not going to stick their neck out, for a new emerging category and put their other licenses on the line. So for our category to grow, we actually had to work with a lot of groups already in a regulated space. So we're kind of operating at a different level, but we're also looking to tap into distribution and retail channels that also have state and federal licenses where they're not willing to jeopardize those for the sake of a new emerging category. As great as we are and as fast as we're growing, we're still not a majority of their business. So we have to keep that in mind. So as much as we've been able to scale using those partners, they also are going to require, just by definition, that we are operating at a higher level, even without the regulation in place.
Right. Yeah, you have to do it in order to earn the trust of all retailers, distributors, consumers. So it makes sense. And yeah, go ahead.
And there is inherent trust when you see these products on the shelves of a Total Wine or a Binny's or a Specs. Consumers see products there and they assume these products are abiding by some sort of regulatory body, some sort of guardrails. And while we very much oftentimes are, whether it's our code of conduct or what our alcohol partners are requiring, the consumer has trust when they see those products on those shelves. And that is something that we are very much, advocating for, not only upholding, but actually implementing into regulation that's being overseen by a local as well as, eventually a federal regulatory body.
Gotcha. So it sounds like we really shouldn't expect to see anything until 2026 on a new hemp bill. Is that the way the wind is blowing?
At the federal level, I think we might very well be waiting until 2026. Ideally, again, we would get a very thin layer of acceptance of intoxicating cannabinoids from hemp, and then push for states' rights, which is what a number of other groups are also advocating for on the alcohol side that operate independent of us. I mean, the Wine and Spirits Wholesaler Association, who has been a great ally to our category, has been advocating for states' rights for the last 2 years, because they see this as an opportunity. I don't think there's anyone who isn't aware that alcohol sales are down. Beer and wine both, have sales that have been struggling. This is an opportunity. I've always said, as much as some people might be replacing their alcohol with these products, it's not an either or. The occasion dictates the beverage. And, I might, on a Tuesday night when I've got to work early the next day, I'm not going to open a bottle of wine because, 2 glasses of that feels very different in your 40s than it used to. So, there's opportunity, though, for, I think, all of these beverages. And I think the alcohol industry is starting to see that there is an opportunity with these to be another complement and another adult beverage that their target consumers are looking for. We've heard from Specs as well as Total Wine that 1/3 of the shoppers that are buying these products in their stores are new shoppers to their stores. So we're bringing in new consumers to these retailers. So it's an opportunity. I think before you always heard of alcohol and cannabis kind of fighting and going head to head with each other. I think what we're proving here is that there's an opportunity to be playing in the same sandbox.
Especially when the industry is down and they're looking for a lifeboat in order to build revenue further. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. Appreciate you both coming on and sharing your inputs. It's a really dynamic, chaotic market right now. So hopefully we can have you both on in a few months, and we'll have much more clarity and better news across the board. But it's been really cool talking to you both. Jake, I'd love to give you a last word before we go. Anything that you have your eyes on regarding the market or anything in general?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I would say that we covered a lot of ground here, see dynamics and the legal and regulatory environment that we find ourselves in. And I appreciate that it does feel, often in flux. But I think that's largely because things are changing so fast. But the net assessment, the effect of these changes are generally positive, right? Barring a little issue here or a little issue there. And they're usually driven by individuals, right? There's like a common theme when we see this happen. It's like one person gets it like a bee in their bonnet about this category and can't be reasoned with. And so that's okay. That's going to happen in any emerging category. This is new. We recognize that. I think taking a big step back, you see sort of the shape of what we're building here. And it's pretty impressive. It's pretty amazing how hemp has partnered with alcohol, how we've come together to figure out how to get these products in the hands of adults and out of the hands of kids. In the states that are letting us do that, it is working. It's really working. And you see this amazing thing. Last week I was in Jacksonville, Florida. And I was in a Winn-Dixie grocery store, and it was amazing just sitting in front of the aisle. They've got THC drinks, a number of brands, including Cann, and watching people shop this. This isn't a grocery store. They're going through their normal sort of weekly shopping. They've got bananas, they've got cereal, they've got milk, and they're picking up THC drinks. And not only are they picking them up, they're turning to me being like, "Oh, have you heard of these before? They're amazing. You got to try this one. You got to try that one." It's a pretty incredible opportunity and a pretty incredible consumer moment. And it is coming at just the right time when folks are really, really focused on what they're putting in their bodies, how they can be just a little bit healthier, living a little bit more of a well life. And it's exciting for us to be a part of that moment. And even though we sometimes have a setback here or a setback there, we're headed in the right direction.
Love that mindset. Very positive. And you certainly changed my mind on where this was headed. Even coming into this conversation, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's getting banned everywhere, all these states. But yeah, it's interesting to hear, how that's been going in your world. And I'm fascinated to see how this progresses throughout the year. So, appreciate you both coming on, and thank you so much. It's been fun to have a chat.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle.